$3. That's all it took to buy a man they said could never be tamed. But she didn't want to tame him. She wanted to free him, and in doing so, she freed herself. Watch what happens next.
Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.
The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square of Copper Ridge as Eleanor Bennett stood among the sparse crowd, her worn leather satchel clutched tightly against her side. She had come to town for supplies, not for this spectacle. But something made her pause when she heard the auctioneer's frustrated voice carrying across the dusty plaza. Come now, folks, somebody must have use for him. He's strong, healthy, can work, just has a temperament is all. On the raised platform stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from the very mountains that surrounded their valley. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and jet-black hair that fell to his shoulders. But it was the defiant set of his jaw and the fire in his dark eyes that caught her attention. He wasn't looking down in shame or defeat like she'd seen with other unfortunate souls at these proceedings. He was looking straight ahead with his chin raised, as if daring anyone to try and claim him. He came down from the high country, the auctioneer continued. Found him trespassing on the Patterson ranch, wouldn't give his name, wouldn't explain himself. Judge said somebody could take responsibility for him, or he'd spend 6 months breaking rocks. So far, nobody's willing. Tom Miller's arm yesterday, someone called out from the crowd. Tom was trying to chain him like a dog, another voice countered. Can't blame a man for that. The auctioneer wiped his brow. Regardless, his debt to the court needs settling. We'll start at $10. Silence greeted this proclamation. Eleanor watched as the man on the platform's expression never wavered. There was something noble about him, something wild and unbroken that reminded her of the mustangs that ran free in the canyons before men tried to tame them. $5 then, the auctioneer said, his voice growing weary. Still nothing. The crowd was beginning to disperse, losing interest. That's my final offer before he goes to the work gang. Eleanor's hand went to her satchel. She had $7 inside, meant for seed and flour to last her through the month. Her small teaching salary barely covered her needs, but she'd learned to be careful, to make every penny count. $3 was nearly half of what she had. Before she could think better of it, her hand rose into the air. The auctioneer looked genuinely surprised. The schoolteacher bids $3. Going once, going twice. Sold to Miss Bennett. A murmur rippled through the remaining crowd. Eleanor heard whispered warnings as she approached the platform to pay, but she kept her eyes on the man as the sheriff removed his bonds. Up close, she could see the bruises on his wrists where the ropes had been, and a cut above his eyebrow that looked a few days old. You're responsible for him now, Miss Bennett, the sheriff said, counting her coins. Anything he does, any trouble he causes, it's on you. The man still hadn't looked at her. He stood rigid, staring into the distance, his hands flexing as if getting used to being free of restraints. What's your name? Eleanor asked quietly. For the first time, those dark eyes shifted to meet hers. He studied her face for a long moment, and she had the unsettling sensation of being truly seen, as if he could peer straight into her soul. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like gravel underfoot. You just spent $3 on something you know nothing about. Maybe you should have asked that before. I'm asking now, Eleanor said, refusing to be intimidated despite the rapid beating of her heart. A ghost of something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Daniel Strongheart. Strongheart, I'm Eleanor Bennett. I have a small house at the edge of town where I run a school for the valley children. Behind it, there's a room above the stable that needs repair. If you're willing to fix it and do some other work around the property, you can stay there. I can offer meals and a small wage once you've worked off the $3. And if I just walk away right now, he asked, though there was curiosity rather than hostility in his tone, then I'll be out $3 I couldn't afford to lose, and you'll have the sheriff and a posse after you before nightfall, Eleanor said practically. But I'm hoping you won't. I'm hoping you're a man of honor despite what everyone says. Daniel's jaw tightened. What do they say? That you're untamable, dangerous, Wild as a wolf and twice as mean. Eleanor tilted her head. But I don't see that when I look at you. I see someone who's angry, yes, but I also see someone who refused to be treated less than human. There's a difference between untamable and simply refusing to be broken. The defensive walls didn't come down, but perhaps they lowered just a fraction. Lead the way, Miss Bennet, he said finally. They walked through town side by side, Eleanor acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. She kept her head high, her steps purposeful. Her schoolhouse sat at the far end of the main road, a simple wooden structure with a small cottage beside it. Behind both buildings stood a modest stable that housed her aging mare, Pepper. The room is up there, Eleanor said, pointing to the loft above the stable. It's full of old furniture and supplies right now, but there's space if you can clear it. I'm afraid I don't have much in the way of extra blankets or... I've slept in worse places. Daniel interrupted, then seemed to catch himself. Thank you. For the room. You're welcome. Eleanor paused, then decided to be direct. Mr. Strongheart, I won't pretend to know your story, or what brought you here. You don't owe me explanations. But while you're on my property, I ask 3 things. Be honest with me, don't frighten my students, and give me a fair day's work. Can you agree to that? Daniel looked at her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone looking for cheap labor they could lord their charity over. Someone who'd want to tame me into something I'm not. He crossed his arms. Why did you really buy my contract, Miss Bennet? Eleanor considered her answer carefully. Because I know what it's like to have people decide who you are before you've had a chance to show them. When I came to this town 2 years ago, they didn't want a woman teacher. Said I'd be too soft, that I couldn't control the older boys, that I'd quit after 1 winter. I'm still here. I suppose I have a soft spot for people who don't fit into neat boxes. Fair enough, Daniel said. I can agree to your terms. Honesty, no scaring children, and honest work. He glanced around the property. Looks like you have plenty of that to offer. Indeed, the property showed signs of neglect that one person couldn't keep up with alone. The stable door hung slightly crooked. Several fence posts leaned at precarious angles, and the woodshed looked ready to collapse. I do my best, Eleanor said, a touch of defensiveness creeping into her voice. But teaching 12 children of varying ages keeps me occupied most days. Wasn't a criticism, Daniel said, just an observation. He moved toward the stable. I'll get started on clearing that room before dark. Eleanor returned to her cottage, her hands trembling slightly as she began preparing supper. What had she done? She'd spent money she couldn't spare on a complete stranger, a man with anger in his eyes and accusations of violence following him. The practical part of her mind scolded her for such recklessness. But another part, the part that had survived her own struggles and judgments, whispered that she'd done the right thing. She prepared more stew than usual, and as the sun began to set, she ladled a generous portion into a bowl and carried it to the stable. She found Daniel had already made impressive progress. The loft was half cleared, and he'd organized the old furniture into neat stacks below. I brought supper, Eleanor said. Daniel climbed down the ladder, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cooling evening air. He accepted the bowl with a nod, but didn't move to eat. You can sit on the porch there, Eleanor gestured to the small bench outside the stable. I'm not fit for sitting in clean places right now, Daniel said, glancing at his dusty clothes. The bench has survived rain, snow, and my students using it as a launching point for adventures. I think it can survive a bit of honest dirt. Eleanor sat down on one end. Please. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel sat on the far end, maintaining careful distance between them. He ate slowly, and Eleanor noticed the way his shoulders gradually relaxed as he did. This is good, he said quietly. Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal. How long have you been in these parts? Eleanor asked. Daniel was quiet for so long she thought he woe. Didn't answer. Finally, he said, 3 months been living up in the high country, staying out of sight mostly. Running from something, or running from everything? He set down the empty bowl. I used to be a tracker. Worked for the army. Good at it, too. Could find anyone anything, no matter how hard they tried to hide. Then one day, I was ordered to track a family of Cheyenne who'd left the reservation. Just wanted to go home to their ancestral lands, to die where their grandparents were born. Eleanor remained silent, sensing there was more. I found them, reported their location like I was supposed to. Daniel's voice had gone flat, emotionless. The soldiers I led there didn't just send them back. They made examples of them, said it would discourage others from leaving. I was good at my job, Miss Bennett, too good, and people died because of it. So you left, Eleanor said softly. Couldn't stomach it anymore. Couldn't track another living soul knowing what might happen to them. They called me a deserter, said I broke my contract. Maybe I did, but I couldn't be that person anymore. Couldn't use my skills for that purpose. And you've been wandering since? Trying to figure out who I am if I'm not a tracker. Trying to outrun the faces I see when I close my eyes. He looked at her directly. That's what you bought, Miss Bennett. A man with blood on his hands and ghosts in his head. Still think you made a good investment? I think you're a man who discovered he had a conscience and acted on it despite the cost. That takes more courage than following orders ever could. Daniel looked startled, as if this perspective had never occurred to him. You have an uncommon way of seeing things. Or maybe I just believe people are more than their worst moments. Eleanor stood. Collect. Ting the bull. There's a pump behind the cottage for washing up, and I'll leave some spare clothes outside your door. They were my father's. He passed 2 years ago, but he was about your height. Miss Bennett, Eleanor, Daniel said, stopping her. Why are you being kind to me? Because someone was kind to me once, when I needed it most, Eleanor said simply. Good night, Mr. Strongheart. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of hammering. She looked out her window to see Daniel already at work repairing the stable door, wearing her father's old work shirt and suspenders. Something about the sight made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. When her students began arriving for lessons, Daniel made himself scarce, working on the far side of the property. But Eleanor noticed several of the children watching him with wide eyes. Miss Bennett, who's that man? Asked little Sophie, one of her youngest students. That's Mr. Strongheart. He's helping repair things around the school, Eleanor explained. Is he going to stay? Asked Thomas, one of the older boys with a mix of curiosity and concern. For a while, yes. And I expect you all to be polite and respectful, just as you would with anyone else. She found him working on reinforcing the fence, his movements efficient and skilled. The children are curious about you, she said. Daniel's hands paused. Should I be working somewhere else? No, I'm just telling you. Some are nervous, some are fascinated. That's normal. Eleanor handed him the water. Were you worried about frightening them? I promised I wouldn't, Daniel said, drinking deeply. I keep my promises. Over the following days, a routine developed. Daniel worked on various projects around the property, transforming the neglected areas into well-maintained order. Eleanor taught her classes and prepared meals that she shared with Daniel in comfortable silence, or occasionally punctuated by brief conversations. She learned small things about him, that he had grown up in the territories, the son of a Lakota mother and a French trader father, that he could speak 4 languages, that he loved the mountains because they asked nothing of him except respect, that he still had nightmares about the family he'd tracked. In turn, Daniel learned about Eleanor, how she'd fought to become educated when women in her family were expected only to marry, how she'd lost her parents within months of each other and used her small inheritance to come west and start fresh, how she believed every child deserved an education regardless of their family's wealth or status, how lonely she sometimes felt, being different from what people expected. 2 weeks after Daniel's arrival, Eleanor was walking back from the town store when she heard raised voices. She rounded the corner to find Daniel facing 3 men, his posture tense but controlled. We don't want your kind here, one of them was saying. Troublemaker, Deserter. I'm not looking for trouble, Daniel said evenly. Just walking through. Yeah, well, maybe you should walk yourself right out of Copper Ridge. Eleanor stepped forward before she could think better of it. Is there a problem, gentlemen? The men turned, looking embarrassed to be confronted by a woman. Just having a conversation, Miss Bennet. It looked less like a conversation and more like harassment, Eleanor said firmly. Mr. Strongheart works for me and is under my responsibility. If you have complaints about him, you may address them to me. You don't know what you're dealing with, one of the men said. He's dangerous. He's been nothing but respectful and hard-working, Eleanor countered. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to attend to. She walked past them with her head high, Daniel falling into step beside her. Neither spoke until they were back at the schoolhouse. You didn't have to do that, Daniel said finally. Yes, I did. What they were doing was wrong. Eleanor set down her packages with more force than necessary, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. I'm sorry you had to endure that. I'm used to it. That doesn't make it right, Eleanor said, turning to face him. You deserve to be treated with dignity, like any other person. Daniel stepped closer, his expression intense. You keep defending me, standing up for me. Why? What do you get out of this besides the town's disapproval? Maybe I don't do it to get something, Eleanor said. Maybe I do it because it's right. Maybe I do it because when I look at you, I see someone worthy of defense. You barely know me. I know you've worked honestly every day. I know you're gentle with my old mare when you think no one's watching. I know you fixed the schoolhouse steps without being asked because you noticed they were loose and didn't want the children to trip. I know you carry guilt for things that weren't truly your fault. That tells me plenty about who you are. Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're the most stubborn, idealistic, frustrating woman I've ever met. Thank you, Eleanor said, chin raised. To her surprise, Daniel laughed, a real laugh that transformed his usually serious face. That wasn't entirely a compliment. I chose to take it as one. Something shifted between them in that moment, like a door opening to reveal unexpected light. Daniel's hand reached up, almost of its own accord, and gently touched her cheek. His thumb brushed across her skin with infinite tenderness. Eleanor, he said softly, her name a question and a revelation all at once. Yes, she whispered. I'm not untamable, he said. I never was. I was just lost. But you make me think I could find my way again, make me want to be found. You were never as lost as you thought, Eleanor said, covering his hand with her own. You just needed someone to see the path you couldn't see yourself, and you see it. I see a good man who made hard choices. I see someone capable of great gentleness and great strength. I see someone I trust. She paused, gathering courage. I see someone I've come to care for, more than I probably should. Daniel's other hand came up to cup her face, his dark eyes searching hers. I have nothing to offer you. No property, no prospects. I'm still figuring out who I am and what I'm meant to do with whatever's left of my life. I don't need you to have all the answers, Eleanor said. I just need you to be honest, to be kind, and to stay. Can you do that? The staying might be the hardest part, Daniel admitted. I've been running for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place. Learn with me. We'll figure it out together. Daniel leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her skin. You spent $3 on me and somehow got the better end of the deal. How did that happen? Because you're worth far more than $3, Daniel Strongheart. You always were. You just needed someone to prove it to you. When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, seeking permission even as he offered himself. Eleanor answered by rising on her toes, her hands clutching the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and second chances, of two wounded souls recognizing something kindred in each other. When they finally parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers again. his arms wrapped securely around her waist. I don't. Know how to be what you deserve. Be yourself. That's all I want. The real you, not who you think you should be, or who others tried to make you. What if the real me is still broken? Then you'll be broken and loved. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Eleanor smiled up at him. Besides, I'm a bit broken myself. Maybe we fit together better that way. Over the following months, Daniel became as much a part of the schoolhouse as Eleanor herself. He repaired everything that needed fixing and built new things besides: a proper playground for the children, raised garden beds, a new roof for the stable. The children lost their fear of him and began to see him as a gentle giant who would help them with heavy books or retrieve balls from high places. More importantly, Daniel began to heal. The nightmares came less frequently. The haunted look in his eyes gradually gave way to something calmer, more at peace. He started teaching some of the older students tracking skills: how to read the land, identify plants, move quietly through nature, skills used for understanding, not for hunting people. Eleanor watched him transform, not into something tame, but into someone who'd found a place where his wildness was understood and valued. He would never be conventional, would never quite fit the mold of what the town expected. But he was hers, and she was his, and that was enough. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Daniel took her hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, "about staying, really staying. Not just because I promised, but because I want to." "And what brought about this thinking?" Eleanor asked, though her heart already knew. "You," Daniel said simply. "This place, the children. Waking up every morning with purpose instead of just survival. Realizing that home isn't a place you run from, or a place you can't find. It's the person who sees you clearly and loves you anyway. Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Daniel turned to face her fully, his dark eyes clear and certain. "I'm saying that everyone was right. I am untamable, but they were wrong about what that means. It doesn't mean I can't love or commit or build a life. It means I can't be something I'm not. I can't be tame and ordinary and conventional." "I never wanted you to be," Eleanor said. "I know. That's why I'm asking if you'd consider marrying someone untamable, someone who will probably always be a bit wild around the edges, who won't always fit in, who comes with ghosts and a complicated past. Are you proposing to me, Daniel Strongheart? I don't have a ring. I don't have money or prospects or even a proper suit to wear, but I have a heart that's yours, if you'll have it. I have hands willing to work and build a future with you. I have a promise that I'll love you fiercely and honestly for whatever time we're given." Eleanor kissed him soundly before answering. "Yes. 1,000 times yes. I don't need rings or money or convention. I just need you, exactly as you are." Daniel pulled her close, holding her as if she were precious and fragile and strong all at once. "Best $3 anyone ever spent," he murmured into her hair. Eleanor laughed, a sound full of joy. "I was just thinking the same thing." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together planning a future neither had expected, but both had desperately needed. The schoolteacher and the tracker, the idealist and the wanderer, two people the world had tried to define and limit, finding freedom in loving each other without conditions or expectations. The town would talk, of course. They'd question and judge and whisper. But Eleanor and Daniel had learned that the opinions of others mattered far less than the truth they'd discovered together. That being untamable wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be honored, and that the wildest hearts often loved the deepest when they finally found their home. And Eleanor had bought that home, that future, that love, for $3, the best investment she would ever make, yielding returns beyond measure for the rest of her days.